Welcome to CharityVillage Connects. Today we're exploring whether Canada is experiencing what's known as the Great Resignation and asking whether the nonprofit sector is still seen as a desirable career path, or has burnout and inequitable workplaces caused a large exodus from the sector and high turnover. Joining me today is Lisa Taylor. Lisa Taylor is a sought-after expert, speaker, author, and columnist on today's changing world of work. As president of Challenge Factory and the Center for Career Innovation, Lisa offers invaluable leadership and insights about the future of work, with a focus on how talent equity, demographics, the freelance economy, and new market dynamics present opportunities to gain strategic workforce and career advantage. Welcome, Lisa, and thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Mary. Thanks for having me.
So, Lisa, we've heard so many differing stories in the media, but perhaps you could give us your opinion from your perspective and what you experience. Is the nonprofit sector currently facing a great resignation?
I think when we talk about the Great Resignation, we often look at what's happening in the States, what's happening here. We try to jump to conclusions. And what we like to do at Challenge Factory is to take a step back and set the context for what's been happening with workforces over the last 10 years. So before we even knew anything about this virus, we were in the midst of what we call a talent revolution. Demographics, career ownership, the freelance economy, technology, there was disruption in the way that careers were happening and the way that employers and employees were engaging with each other. So that was a talent revolution. And then what we ended up doing was we added a crisis on top of a revolution. And over the course of the years that we've now been managing through this crisis, that revolution has continued. So when we come to where we are now and we see reports of mass resignations or shifts in jobs or people reskilling or the huge uptake in adult online learning that's taken place over the crisis while people have reskilled themselves, we attribute it to the crisis. But really, actually, this is a long-term trend that has been happening in this sector and in many other sectors as well. People are taking a much stronger sense of career ownership. And especially because of what's happened during the pandemic, they're now aware that they have more options than they thought they might have before. And that's causing people to make different changes. So, for example, people that were on the cusp of retirement may be choosing retirement earlier than they originally had thought, and that their succession plan, if there is one, contemplated. There's a big discussion about whether the Great Resignation in the US is actually the Great Retirement, but in the new sense of the word retirement, where people are leaving a particular career, taking a little bit of time, and then re-engaging in a legacy career in something completely different or in a different organization. And that the jury is still out with. And I think that what we're seeing in the Canadian sector really follows the pattern of people having more choices and acting on them, where before they might just have hung in there and waited for something else to come along.
Well, it certainly is. It's fascinating to think that this pandemic has also given us this opportunity and time to ourselves, in truth, in our isolation during the lockdowns, to really think about our career path and our decisions that we're making in relation to our career. Are there certain subsectors or demographics that you're seeing are particularly impacted when we talk about this Great Resignation? Is it leaders who are leaving?
It's across the board and for different reasons. So we are seeing leaders who, as I mentioned before, may be in that, early 50s, late 50s, 60-year-old age range and deciding, you know what, I've been wondering when the right time for the next move was going to be. And after all of this crisis management that's happened, now seems like a pretty good time. I've gotten the team through to the other side and I'm ready to go and do something different. So we are seeing decisions being made there. We also know that historically there's certain roles that have chronically had high turnover. Development directors, for example, have a history of high turnover and difficulty with retention in many nonprofit and charitable organizations. And we're seeing that continue as well. One pattern that we are seeing that's a little bit different now in terms of choices that people are making for their careers across the nonprofit sector, but I would say also in academia and in other sectors too, is people are taking family and factoring that into their career decisions more than they had before. And not just family in the sense of caregiving obligations, but family in the sense of, does my job allow me to be in close proximity to my family? Canadians in general tend not to move very frequently. We don't cross the country all over the place for jobs the way that, for example, Americans might. We're seeing more movement now where people are wanting to live much closer to where family members are. And that's also impacting the choices people make. So the career choices that people are making, if you are a manager or a leader and having to manage your workforce, it's not just the traditional checking the boxes of how do I retain my people. There's different kinds of conversations that need to happen now to really understand in your organization, is there a great resignation? Is there a different trend that's happening? And what can you do about it?
And so I think it only seems logical that this shift to remote work, hybrid work, are one of the elements that could impact these decisions to change or revamp one's career path or your relationship with a particular organization. Could you talk about what you've seen with regards to the impact of remote work?
Yeah, certainly remote work has opened up a whole world of new possibilities for certain categories of jobs. And for other categories of jobs, remote work isn't a possibility at all. And so I think that we need to keep a balance in the discussion as well and acknowledge that not everybody has remote work as a possibility. One of the most interesting things that's happening right at this moment is a lot of workplaces are asking their teams, what do you want in terms of the future of your work? Do you want to come back to work 1 day a week, 2 days a week, 5 days a week? These are a lot of discussions that we end up in with a number of different leadership teams. And one of the things that I really believe to be true is it's really an impossible question to ask right at this moment. That a lot of the focus on remote and hybrid work tends to default to talking about real estate and square footage and leases, as opposed to culture and values and what it means to be an employee in your organization. And it's the wrong way round. People may be making choices because they can work remotely and they've quite enjoyed it. But will they still enjoy working remotely when they're one of the outliers and everyone else is in the office and grabbing coffee? Or there's a quick exchange in the hallway because people have run into each other, and so now knowledge and information is known in some circles but not in others. It raises a significant issue for leaders to really think about. A hybrid workplace is not nearly the same as an all in-person workplace, and it's not the same as when everybody is remote. It is a totally different style and type of leadership that's required when you're leading a truly hybrid team. It requires different technology, it requires different rituals, different ways of engagement. It requires really solid strategy based on a culture that has core values that can still see everyone, even if they're not all in the office at the same time.
And so I'd like to go back to this idea of the departure of many workers from the sector and find out what your thoughts are about what's being called a burnout epidemic in the nonprofit sector. We know that the nonprofit sector was disproportionately impacted in many cases in many subsectors with burnout, anxiety, exhaustion, really. What have you seen, and how much does that have as an impact in seeing people leave the sector, if at all?
Yeah, the sector has been hard hit mainly because it's a sector that, for the vast majority of organizations, has fewer resources at its disposal. So, to be able to pivot and have the right technology at home is not necessarily something that everyone was set up for. To be able to have the number of people that all of a sudden need to be able to be providing support when everyone is remote is a very difficult challenge for all organizations, but especially for this sector has really hit them hard. And the sector I've seen really can be categorized in two different camps. One is organizations and jobs and roles that had far too much work all of a sudden on their shoulders in really significant ways. And then the second is where the work just absolutely declined. And there was far too little work in order to be able to continue to move forward with mandates and plans when everything kept getting put on hold, or you would start to do your work, but then you'd have to postpone and delay because the date had shifted. In both of those situations, there is stress, and that is causing burnout across the board. And people were seeing it, especially now, as you know, I think in general, Canadians are tired for all kinds of reasons, and we're seeing that come out in the workload. But I come back to just really good core management and career management. One of the things that we know that helps people in organizations, that helps to retain them, that helps them with their own career identity and being able to balance their work, is to know that their manager is interested in them and sees a future for them in the organization that they're in. And in the midst of this crisis that has put an undue burden as well on managers, one of the things that has gone by the wayside is casual, future-focused, positive conversations about where that individual is going within the organization. And without really having a clear sense of whether their work is valued, whether it's purposeful, whether it's helpful, whether there's a future for them within that organization, it just becomes an ongoing slog. And it becomes really important to connect the work that I'm doing today and working so hard to do in ways that are not natural to me, that are having me miss my colleagues and do things that are not at the quality level perhaps that I want. I can't connect that back to the why of the organization. I can't connect that back to the mission that we're supposed to be doing because I'm just trying to fight these fires. So one of the things that's really important in this discussion about burnout is to recognize that, first of all, burnout is real and mental health concerns are real, and there needs to be supports for that. And there are other layers of support that managers can be providing just by asking future-focused questions among their staff and giving them an opportunity to dream a little bit. Even in a world like this where that feels impossible, it makes an enormous difference.
Well, in connection to burnout and I guess depression or anxiety, is a potential return to the physical workplace contributing to workers' anxiety or concerns that may actually be prompting them to depart?
It's a good question, and I think my answer is going to be a little controversial and a little bit different than what you would normally hear. So there are large categories of people that have concerns about going back to a workplace. They are concerned about safety. They are concerned about the protocols. They have not been in that environment for a long time, and our patterns and behaviors have shifted over time. And we need to be sensitive to the fact that these concerns are very, very real. And at the same time, simply letting everyone stay in their homes actually doesn't move us into recovery. The whole point of all of the actions and activities that we've been taking over the last 2 years has not been so that we can permanently stay locked in our home offices forever and never interact again. And employers and leaders, I believe, have an actual social responsibility to be a catalyst. We need reasons to come back out of our homes, and work is one of those reasons. It doesn't mean that you have to have people come back into the workplace 5 days a week, but it does mean that if you're going to choose to let someone remain working remote permanently, there needs to be a real plan for who's going to make sure that they're actually doing okay. Because one of the things that we lose by being remote in our homes is the daily check-ins and the opportunity to be able to just have eyes on each other and notice, oh, something is shifting and maybe that person needs a little bit of extra help and support. So where the discussion about mental health and well-being, anxiety typically tips to the side of keeping people having choice on whether they come back to the office or not, I actually think that it's an abdication of leadership to just allow everyone to remain permanently in their homes without really bringing it back to, why are you an organization? Why do you do the work that you do? And where is there a role for at-home work? And where is there a role for us to actually come together? Because it helps with so many other aspects of work and life to be able to be together. And that's really been the goal over the last 2 years. We can learn how to do remote work without having everyone work remotely permanently.
Well, and we are social animals as human beings, and although we've learned and discovered we can work differently than we previously can, I would agree with you that it seems to be part of our nature to connect on a social level, in person, or at least via screens, and perhaps we wouldn't have been able to survive as well as we had were we not experience this pandemic during a time when we had the technology available to actually see each other, even though we're not together.
Yes, and it has been a great moment for, from an accessibility perspective, to be able to have different types of conversations with different types of parts of the workforce that usually would find it very challenging to be able to be in and integrated and leading through different types of roles and conversations. So there is a role for that technology to play. And at the same time, we've lost things too. People that are earlier in their career express great anxiety over the fact that they don't actually have face-to-face or an ability to interact with their colleagues. We've lost the serendipity of meeting people that you don't intend to meet. And that means that from a diversity and equity and inclusion perspective, your circles are going to stay pretty small. They're going to stay with the people that are on the meeting invite, not the other communities that you might be able to interact and engage with when there's social events that are taking place, or whether there's committees and other work that's taking place just ad hoc within your buildings. So that balance between what do we lose and what do we gain is something that every organization needs to do the math on, and needs to make good decisions, not based on real estate square footage and not necessarily based on employee opinion right at this moment, but with an eye on what type of company, organization, institution, what type of leadership do we want to show, what culture do we want to have in the future, and what do we want to be famous for? And then what's the right mix for us in order to accomplish that?
With regards to burnout, will things like the recent legislation, such as what's known as the right to disconnect legislation in Ontario, will it be helpful in protecting staff and organizations from the impacts of burnout? What do you think of this legislation and the potential impact overall, positive or negative?
First, I think it's important to note that the legislation only applies to certain employers of certain size. So it's not everyone across the board. And I think that it's also really important to note that good leadership and preventing burnout isn't necessarily something that I would put in the category as something that the government should have to legislate. That if we're having to legislate treating people well, then something has gone terribly wrong in how we approach leadership overall. Some people are going to prefer to work at all different times, and by the nature of legislation, it's going to be very hard to create the right rules for the right context for each and every organization and each and every employee. If the intention is that employees have an opportunity to step away from their work, to have a true break, to be able to have reasonable expectations on their time, those are things that we typically would expect as part of a corporate culture. And the fact that those have to be legislated is a really interesting moment in time for us in terms of what is the role of the leadership teams, what's the role of the government, and what's my role as an employee to make choices that are good for me so that I'm not staying in conditions that are terrible for my own work-life balance. Some people are burning out because the workload is really high and really constant. And for them, having a rule that they can point to that says, I'm sorry, but I couldn't respond to that email because I'm legally not able to. If you think about that in the context and what that means, what level of dialogue you are now at in your company, if this legislation is the thing that is causing disconnection at midnight, for example, that's a real wake-up call, I think, for leaders. Other people are burning out for completely separate reasons. And I think it's really important that we know our staff, that we take the time to really understand within your organization, what is the cause of the burnout? Is it workload? Is it expectation at all hours? Is it a lack of technology and tools, but you're still expecting people to do the work that they need to do? Is it relationships that have gone sour or that are toxic within the workplace? This legislation isn't a panacea. It's not going to fix everything. And it should be that wake-up call that says to leaders, if I think that this legislation is either good or bad, why is that? And what actually should I be doing to be helping my workforce, whether things are legislated or not?
So well said. I want to return to your discussion about, I guess, the important activities by managers and people as leaders within nonprofit organizations to not just acknowledge people's work, but to appreciate the person and having that human connection as part of that glue that helps leaders retain their staff. Could you talk a little bit in more detail about that, the critical aspect of what leaders have to do to better retain their staff in these difficult times?
Yeah, so as we know, leaders that take an interest in their staff and have future-focused career conversations, which is separate from performance management conversations, but career conversations that really explore where do you want to go? What skills do you want to learn? Where do you want to go next? Those are the organizations that retain their staff. Many leaders shy away from those conversations for a number of reasons. When I was doing research for the Retain and Gain Career Management series of playbooks, there's one that's specifically for the nonprofit and charitable sector. I learned that there's really 3 reasons why managers won't engage in those career-focused conversations. The first one is called Pandora's box. They're worried about opening up a career conversation with their staff because what if that staff member wants a raise, wants a promotion, wants a different title, wants something that with the resources within the organization, they just can't satisfy. So rather than raising the question, they keep that box closed, they never have the conversation. The second reason why managers are reluctant to have the conversation is they think that it's going to take a lot of time. And if you never have a career conversation with your staff, the first time you engage in a conversation, that's going to take a long time. But if you're engaging in career conversations with your staff all the way along, they can be short 10-minute checkpoints that just amp up the performance, the productivity, the connection, the culture within your organization. It's a very small investment of time for a very large return. The last reason why managers are reluctant to have those conversations is because they're not actually certain what's going to happen next in their own career. And there's a bit of imposter syndrome. How can I open up this conversation? They're going to ask me what I think is happening next in the organization. I don't know where we're going, and I don't want them to know that I don't have that answer. The first and the third, the Pandora's box and the imposter syndrome, are really solid reasons why people are afraid to have these conversations. But it takes a little bit of trust and a little bit of courage to be able to recognize that having the conversation allows you to engage your staff in solving some of those problems. Most people, when they think about advancement in their career, they do not think about a raise or a title change. They want to expand their influence. They want to increase the number of people that they know. They want to develop new skills. There are a myriad of ways for you to continue advancing and developing your people without it coming down to salary and title. So there really isn't a huge reason to be afraid of having the conversation. There are resources like the Retain and Gain playbook that can help you open that door if you're hesitant. But when we're talking about, burnout and how do you help your staff and what do leaders need to be doing and how can we be engaging staff in these really challenging times, helping them see their future with you is the single greatest, strongest return on investment that you can have for how you can help them navigate with you so that you're not alone in having to make all of these decisions as you start to map out the future of your own organization.
So that's fantastic advice. I'd like you to also look on the flip side and help organizations or people running organizations with some tips about what they need to do to recruit staff, particularly in these really challenging months or even years ahead, um, when in fact they could be in the process of transformation within the organization itself in terms of adapting to the demands of a pandemic and how they've continued to work. What tips do you have for the person who's trying to recruit?
Yeah, it's a challenging time at the moment to be recruiting, and we're not used to the market being like this, where there are far more openings than there are candidates. So it comes down to a couple of basics. The first is you really need to know your employer value proposition. Why should I come and work for you? What's the difference in working for you and working across the street at some other organization? And just being tied to a really important mission isn't enough, because we know a lot of organizations that are within the nonprofit and charitable sector that have amazing, amazing missions in the world and are terrible places to work. And we know a ton of private sector organizations or other sectors or other types of organizations that if you looked on the surface and said, really, that's what you commit your day to all day, doing that, they are amazing places to work. That comes down to culture and to really living the values of the organization. And that includes through the recruitment process. So what's your employer value proposition, and how does it reflect the culture of the organization that you have? If that's hard to write, then there's more work that you need to do so that you actually become a place where people want to work. You need to address imbalances and precarious work. There's all kinds of conditions that are really well known throughout the sector. And if we're in this kind of market, now's the time to take a step back and really address them. Salary transparency. Make sure that people know what you pay for different positions, and an ability for them to then plan. It's not so much about them doing a keeping up with the Joneses type of analysis. It's so that they can say, okay, I really like this organization, and if I go there, here's what my future can look like. And I can make my own choices of where I need to be on a particular salary band. It's not always about the highest salary. But if everything is a black box and no information is coming to me, I don't feel very engaged in that process. It's also important to demonstrate that you understand where there's shortcomings in how you've done things in the past. One of the really interesting stats that we've been able to track is in the US, the organizations that saw the greatest number of resignations over the summer and the organizations that are struggling the most to hire staff right now are organizations that didn't treat their employees well through the pandemic. Take a look back at the communications that you've been sending and how you've been treating the people that are currently working in your organization. And if you haven't been a stellar boss, if you haven't been the best communicator, first give yourself a bit of a break. You've been navigating a pandemic as well, and I think that's only fair and reasonable. But then recognize that people are demonstrating loyalty, they're referring others, and they're becoming phenomenal alumni, even if they've moved on from your organization, when they feel like they've been treated well. So what do you need to do to demonstrate to your current employees that you think that they're valuable, while you're also focusing on those new employees that are coming in the door?
I was struck by your comments about employer branding, because one of the challenges that I've observed in nonprofits in Canada is this traditional dependence on the mission statement being what is the attractor for, or the attraction for potential recruits, and not completely ignoring or not giving enough emphasis of the actual employer brand, or rather the experience of being an employee within that organization that focuses on culture or career path or these other things that we associate with being a good employer and being a great place to work. Could you talk about that in terms of, what you've seen in the nonprofit sector and the need to really amp up this understanding that they can't just rely on the mission?
Yeah, there's an old joke that involves Steve Jobs and all kinds of things of what happens when you're a recruit and then what your first day on the job actually feels like. And how there's this marked shift all of a sudden as you move from one status to another. We sometimes see that extend beyond your first day. Maybe there's some, really great onboarding and new employee program that comes to an end 2 weeks later, or 4 weeks later, or 3 months later, and then all of a sudden you're back into the masses and just the general population of employees in the organization. I think this is really dangerous, especially in the nonprofit sector, and it's because it's incredibly expensive. People will be attracted by your mission, especially people that have a real passion for the work that you're doing or a real connection to the population that you serve or to the community where you're based. It is an easy way to be able to find people that are aligned with the core work that your organization does. And when they join your organization and find that it actually doesn't provide them with the opportunities for them to develop the relationships that they want, to develop the skills that they want, that it isn't a positive working experience, they'll leave. And retaining people in those early months when there's really very little risk, especially in this environment and climate, for them to decide, you know what, I went there and it didn't work. Before I become too entrenched, I better leave, puts you in a permanent cycle of recruitment and hiring. And it is very expensive to continually be hiring and training and onboarding and shifting and mentoring and managing and losing and starting all over again. Not only for the costs for the people that are directly involved in the recruitment cycle, but for the culture of the rest of the organization that has this revolving door of colleagues who are then no longer colleagues. It is a very expensive way to go about doing things. And so I think the mission of organizations, look, I'm proud of the mission of Challenge Factory, and I love the work that we do. But I think relying on it as the attractor, people will come and work here because they're enticed by the mission that you have, is a little bit dangerous. And I think it allows you to sidestep some of the harder culture-related questions that you actually need to be addressing if you're going to be a top attractive employer in this type of market.
I'd like to just touch on that whole issue of culture and toxic workplaces potentially that you observed earlier on in this discussion that can exist even in the nonprofit sector that's known for its good work for the community, that sometimes working in these organizations can be pretty toxic. And I'm curious whether you have anecdotally or whether you've been able to work with organizations that are struggling with losing people because they don't have an equitable or diverse workplace, or one where they can bring their whole selves to the workplace in a safe and comfortable way to interact with colleagues and perform on the job. I wonder if you could tell us what you've seen in terms of that impact on the Great Resignation, or at least a departure of a lot of people from the sector.
Yeah, so I mean, certainly the discussion of toxicity in the workplace within the nonprofit sector is a popular topic on threads and streams in social media. Employees are taking to different channels to be expressing their frustration or concern, stories of people after they've left, talking about, what it was like and where they are now. Those kinds of things, I think we've seen a real increase through the pandemic. And I think those stories, while on the one hand are painful and are harmful for organizations, I think are good that we're starting to tell those stories and starting to recognize that, like every other sector, this sector has some challenges and we need to be able to talk about them and address them. The vast majority of people that work within the sector may fall within different populations, racialized groups or serving racialized groups, women, caregivers. There's a number of different demographic and marginalization data elements that we need to do a better job of really analyzing and understanding. There's a level of training that managers need to be aware of that is not so much actually about training, but about everyday on-the-job integration of certain skills and curiosities. We talk about that with our students. You know, students, there's a big focus right now on work integrated learning and taking skills and attributes and bringing what you learn in a classroom into work every single day. When it comes to really understanding your workforce and where there are discriminatory practices or practices that are out of date, obsolete, or harmful, we need to take a work integrated learning approach to that as well, but for leaders, where we learn on the job too. I firmly believe that nobody wakes up in the morning and the very first thought they have is, how can I make the work harder and more painful for my staff? I don't think anybody starts their day that way. I think that we lack the tools sometimes to be able to make real change. We lack the courage to take stands where we need to take stands. And we look to each other to be able to get social cues on who's doing what, who's moving forward with this, who's putting this policy in place. We talked a couple of minutes ago about the legislation, the right to disconnect. That's a social cue that then sets the bar so that everyone knows, oh, okay, I can't abuse my staff by having them work 24/7 anymore. In the pandemic, we've lost the opportunities for leaders to network and to meet each other and to get the social cues of who's doing what. And people have really been left to their own devices in order to really use their own leadership skills, their own background, their own personal values in order to keep advancing. We need to get back to holding each other accountable so that we're building a sector that we want. One great question that we often ask in our workshops is, we'll say to people, imagine the world of work and imagine the conditions that your children's children are working in. Describe to me what you dread and what you dream about that world for your children's children. And by putting things into the future, it is amazing how forthcoming we get all of the examples of what's causing toxicity in the workplace today, and all of the positive attributes that cause dream work to happen today. What we need to do is we need to get those out on the table, and then we need to make them true for ourselves, not wait till our children's children, but actually make them true today. And I think that that happens through open and honest conversations. I'm going to come back to the key leadership theme that we have at Challenge Factory with the groups that we're working with, which is trust and courage. It takes a lot of trust and a lot of courage, but there's a lot of problems and we need to be able to address them.
Well, one last, well, not quite last question. I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about something that you've spoken about publicly and written about, which is the hidden talent pool. And how organizations can use what you've referred to as the hidden talent pool to help offset some of the challenges they may be facing with lower staff numbers due to the Great Resignation or other kinds of recruitment challenges. Could you talk about what is the hidden talent pool and why? How can we use it to benefit organizations in the nonprofit sector?
Yeah, I love that question. So earlier on, I talked about how even before the crisis, there was a talent revolution that was happening, and demographics was one of the major disruptors. Age-based demographics, but also other categories of demographics where there are these hidden talent pools that we just don't see. And so even in this moment where we're saying, oh my gosh, there's no people, where are the people? Being able to unearth one of these hidden talent pools is like a gift. It's a little gem. And one of the pools of hidden talent that Challenge Factory does a significant amount of work with, both on the employer side and on the candidate side, are our military veterans. So 10,000 military veterans a year released from the services. They go looking for civilian jobs. They are highly skilled. They are highly motivated. They have the qualities for teamwork and culture that we've been talking about this entire time as something that most organizations would aspire to have within their organization. And they are leaders. And through Challenge Factory's research, we know that the average Canadian hiring manager has a ton of misconceptions about what it means to integrate someone who has military experience into your organization. Most people make assumptions about this hidden pool of talent based on characters that they've seen on television or in movies. And that is not the profile of the Canadian military member. So what Challenge Factory has been really focused on, and what we continue to do this spring, is to provide really innovative programs that allow hiring managers to increase their hiring, recruitment, interviewing capabilities. We provide these services funded by all different partners like Veterans Affairs Canada, Scotiabank, in order to be able to provide them at no charge to employers. And we embed in it the exploration of this one hidden pool of talent as a proxy for other hidden pools of talent that may be out there as well. Misconceptions about different groups within society, we know, always limits our possibilities, but there are a few key hidden pools of talent that right at this moment have the exact right skills that can help you navigate your way out of a pandemic, that know exactly what it means to be navigating a crisis, that knows how to make sure that your resources are being used effectively, and that knows how to keep a team together and focused on mission. And for us, that's in this moment in time, the talent pool that we're really the most excited about are our military veterans.
I'm so fascinated and appreciative of your insights, and your advice is going to be so very helpful for sector leaders and organizations to navigate this very challenging time. Thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, it's my great pleasure.